to Facebook and Twitter and all that.
So hey everyone, this is just a quick impromptu Tom's Hardware show. Our normal host Sharon Harding is out today, but I'm Abram Pillage, Tom's Hardware Editor-in-Chief, and I'm here today with video card editor Jarred Walton and Deputy Managing Editor Paul Alcorn, and we're here to talk about the big news for today about the leak from Micron. So, Jarred, for those not totally familiar with the story, can you summarize what we just learned today?
Yeah. So, hi, Abram. Hi, Paul. It's like we all heard rumors of RTX 3090 coming, right? I'd even put down in our Everything You Need to Know article that, well, the 3090 could have 24 gig. Maybe it's the replacement for the Titan line, but clearly that's not what's happening. And Micron posted a PDF. I've even got it. They've since pulled the PDF, which tells you like this was not an intentional leak, right? But it was called the Demand for Ultra Bandwidth Solutions, and in there they said that it would have 12 gigabytes of GDDR6X memory, so that confirmed the GDDR6X rumor, and that it would be clocked, the memory would be clocked at 19 to 21 gigabits per second, which means anywhere from 912 to 1008 gigabytes. I said gigabits per second before, but gigabytes per second total memory. So a terabyte per second of memory bandwidth. And just to like make it absolutely clear, 21st anniversary of the first GPU, the GeForce 256, and then 21-day countdown to the launch that started a couple days ago, and it's going to happen on September 1st. So, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious. It's going to be 21 gigabits per second memory, and it's going to hit 1 terabyte per second of bandwidth using GDDR6X.
So what does that mean? Like, what is that going to do for the user?
I mean, like, it's a big jump, right? So the RTX 2080 Ti has, I've got this written down so I can refer to it. It has 616 gigabytes per second of memory. So this is like a 64% increase in memory bandwidth. And Nvidia doesn't just like bump memory bandwidth for no reason. If it has 64% more memory bandwidth, it means the GPU is probably going to be similarly increased in performance. It might be 50% faster, it might be 75% faster, but somewhere in that range. So compared to an RTX 2080 Ti, this is a big jump. And that was kind of expected, right? Like, it's 7 nanometer, it's all these other enhancements, it's Ampere architecture. They're rolling out the big guns, but this is going to be a monster of a GPU.
I have a lot of questions about cost. So the big thing here is GDDR6X is much faster, but the problem is they're using PAM4 encoding. So typically across the memory bus, you're sending two bits per clock. Bam, right? Pretty simple binary thing. Now with PAM4, which you see a lot in networking and other types of applications. And even PCIe 6 will use PAM4. You're sending 4 bits per clock cycle. So that's going to, number one, raise the complexity of the DRAM. Number two, it's going to necessitate a special memory controller. NVIDIA
wait, no.
Special memory controller.
Sorry to interrupt there. Isn't GDDR6 already doing more than 2 bits per clock? Like I thought the base clock on GDDR6 was like 1/4 or 1/8 the data rate.
I believe that right now GDDR6 is doing NRZ. I'm pretty positive.
Do you think I'm technical? Paul's more technical than I am.
Which is it's 2 bits. In either case, it's going to absolutely raise complexity. So you always have that trade-off between HBM, as we know, has not went over well on pricing with video cards. And you have GDDR, which is your more value option. Looks like GDDR6X is going to fit somewhere in between the two on pricing. But JEDEC, which is the industry, the industry association that controls memory specifications, hasn't said anything about GDDR6X. So this might even be like a custom memory,
yeah,
Micron, and then If it's not standardized, then you're looking at even higher costs. So how
Right, but well, this
process
has
do it?
historical precedence, right? Like GDDR5X is not a JEDEC standard, right? That was something Nvidia
Yeah.
did
Yep.
only for the 1080 and 1080 Ti. Do I have that right? Yeah.
Correct.
And guess what? Micron also made GDDR5X for them. So, this is not without precedent. I mean, but you talk cost. You're jumping ahead in my discussion here, but I mean, it's going to be expensive. There's no
Sorry.
doubt in my mind. It's going to be a beast. I thought it was going to replace the Titan. The Titan RTX is a $2,500 card. It could be cheaper than the Titan RTX, right? But I'm totally not ruling out a $2,000 price point on the RTX 3090.
Wow, that is.
I mean, like let's
expensive.
talk. Yeah, it's massive. That's basically almost double the price of the 2080 Ti. Potentially almost double the performance. I mean, it theoretically architectural changes. It could be twice as fast, but I mean, the last 90 series GPU from Nvidia was the GTX 690. That was back in 2012 that launched. That was a dual GPU solution. It cost $1,000. The single GPU solution was the GTX 680, and it was $500. 690 is not, or sorry, 3090 is not going to be dual GPU. Like 12 gigabytes of VRAM is not going to be for a dual GPU, but double the price of the next tier. Like Nvidia is not going to sell this for cheap. It could be less than 2,000, but it's going to be a beast.
So I just want to remind our audience we put these videos up on YouTube where anyone can watch them at any time, but we're live right now, and so we're really excited to take your questions and comments on YouTube or Facebook or Periscope, wherever you are. We'll definitely be responding to them. So please chime in.
Yeah, share this with your friends. Hop on, ask us questions. We're live, and we'll do our best to answer.
Where do you think we're going to land at for memory capacity on these cars?
Well, so Micron said 12 gigabytes for the of GDDR6X for the 3090. Got to get my numbers to 3090. We had 11 gigabytes on the 2080 Ti, 11 gigabytes on the 1080 Ti. That was kind of a weird number. It was done kind of for marketing purposes. Turn the dial to 11, 11 gigabits per second. You also had that. Well, we don't want to take over the Titan space, which was the 12 gigabytes or 24 gigabytes for the last two generations. So they're going to 12 gigabytes. They still have that 24 gigabyte option to do on a Titan card if they want to do that down the road. But I think 10 gigabytes is probably more likely for the 3080. And below that, I think they'll probably do what we saw with the 1070 and the 1080, where the 1080 used GDDR5X and the 1070 used GDDR5, and they were both 8 gigabyte cards. So I think you will have another case of that where the 3080 will be 10 gigabytes of GDDR6X. It might be clocked a little bit lower than the 3090. I don't know. Still 21 gigabits per second seems likely. And then you could have like a GDDR6 non-X version clocked at 18 gigabits per second for a 3070 card. They might even go lower than that. They could do 16 gigabits per second. But I think, you've got those tiers of cost and performance, and NVIDIA likes to keep a nice 20-ish% separation between each tier.
So we have a viewer ask, is 10 gigabits enough for 4K?
10 gigabytes or gigabits? Gigabytes is what he means, right? But yeah, it's kind of enough, right? 8K or 8 gigabyte cards can run 4K. 11 gigabytes cards have a little bit more headroom. I think for 8K you'd be running into VRAM limits more, but for 4K I think 10 gigabytes is certainly still enough. Like 8 gigabyte cards don't usually run out of memory, they run out of computational power when you're trying to do 4K Ultra. And so adding the extra memory, well, it's a way to actually increase your bandwidth as well as your memory capacity because you have two more 32-bit memory channels.
Another viewer asked, actually maybe the same person asked, now that I think about it, I have a GTX 1070. If I get an RTX 3070, will it maybe be 70% faster?
That's a lot of 70s. I think it will be more than 70%. I would have to pull up the exact numbers, but my expectation is we're going to see probably a 40 to 50% generational uplift relative to the 20 series. So I think a 2070 was already faster than a 1080 Ti, not by a lot, but it is pretty close, right? And so the 2070 is probably about 30 to 40% faster than a 1070, which means that your 3070 would be 40% faster than that. So it's going to be about 2x a net improvement over a 1070.
What games specifically do you think people would benefit from most with something like a 3090? Like what would they actually be able to play that they can't play well now?
The real thing is going to be your 4K ultra gaming. I mean, as expensive as a 2080 Ti is, and I've got them for testing, right? We've been using them for 2 years now, and there's still a lot of games that you can't lock in 60 frames per second at 4K ultra, never mind 100 frames per second or 120 frames per second. So if you're a 4K gamer, you're serious about 4K gaming, and you don't want to turn down your settings to medium, then this should hopefully finally be the 4K card that locks in 60 frames per second. I mean, I'm testing Horizon Zero Dawn, just launched last week or this week. Anyway, that just came out on PC at 4K ultra settings. It's getting about 52, I think, frames per second on the 2080 Ti. So it's good, it's playable, but it's not 60 plus. And so, you know, you've got 120 hertz displays coming out. You've got a lot of 120 hertz OLED TVs that are starting to go into the market. LG's lineup is all 120 hertz. They're high-end stuff, right? So anyone running something like that, well, you'd want to have more than 60 hertz refresh rate, which means you need more than 60 frames per second. So that's going to be your big selling point. Expensive TVs and expensive graphics cards. That's my take.
So, oh, that's not actually a question. Hold on. Let me get one that's actually a question. Does mid-range, Jeff asks, does mid-range even exist anymore?
So this is interesting. I mean, mid-range exists, but it's changed. So your budget cards, they're basically dying out. Like, I can't honestly recommend anyone buy a budget card for $150, $160, especially not the $100 stuff. Your GTX 1050 is, well, in terms of performance right now, Intel's upcoming Xe graphics, that's in Tiger Lake, which we expect to launch on September 2nd, one day after we expect this Nvidia briefing to occur, right? That's going to be a busy week. But Tiger Lake's LP graphics, Xe LP, I expect to be about 2 teraflops, which is basically a GTX 1050. And anyone buying a Tiger Lake laptop is going to get that for free, which means budget has now disappeared. So you move up to the next step, and your new budget becomes $180 or $160. So like the GTX 1650 Super. And then your mid-range gets pushed up to like $250, $300. And then your high end becomes $500 and your enthusiast becomes $1,000. And, you know, it's painful to see in a lot of regards, but that's the market is redefining the price points. So if you think mid-range means a $200 graphics card, my take is that Nvidia and AMD have both basically said, sorry, that's our budget cards now.
Although to be fair to what you said, Jared, the Tiger Lake is only coming to laptops in September. We don't know when those better integrated graphics will come to desktop.
Right. But I mean, like, basically, I don't think anyone should buy a GTX 1050. That's like, it's too slow for me. You could kind of use it, but I wouldn't be happy as a PC gamer using that. I feel like kind of your 1660 Super is the bare minimum. And honestly, I'd be like, no, just pay the $300 and get a 2060 or get an RX 5600 or 5700, because those end up being a much better overall experience. They can easily do 1080p. They can even do 1440p. So that's kind of where I sit. If you play lighter games, though, you can definitely get by with a far slower GPU, in which case it's like you've probably already got that GPU, right? I mean, if you already own a 950, 960, and you're still able to play the games you want, don't upgrade.
So Sergeant Lee 86 asks, will the GPU do 4K at 144 hertz, or will it have NVLink?
So hertz, yes. How's that for a qualification? Like your current 2080 Ti, your 20 series, all support 4K over DisplayPort at 144 hertz, but you do have to use chroma subsampling to get the 144 hertz. You can do 98 hertz at 4K without with full RGB 8-bit color, right? So in terms of hertz, yeah, they'll support the higher refresh rate, I'm sure. I think Nvidia hasn't confirmed, but I'm assuming, because the standard's been defined for over a year now, that the Ampere GPUs will support both DisplayPort 2.0 and HDMI 2.1. Those are both capable of driving 8K 60 hertz, 4K 120 hertz without using DSC or any compression techniques. So you don't have to deal with 422 chroma or any of that garbage. And I mean, it's 422 is fine for videos and even video games, but where it becomes very noticeable is text on the screen, and video games do have a lot of text, so you can still see the shimmer that the chroma subsampling causes. So I like to stick with full RGB personally. But now, if you're talking frames per second, 144 frames per second, I would assume they're still going to support NVLink. I don't think that's going away. I also don't think it's necessary for gamers. There's so many games that have launched in the last year or two that simply don't support multi-GPU at all. Everything DirectX 12, not DirectX 12, DirectX ray tracing has no support for multi-GPU right now. Same with Vulkan RT, the ray tracing stuff. So if you have two 2080 Ti cards and you're like, yeah, now I can play Battlefield 5 at 4K and 144 frames per second to max out my $1,500 Asus or Acer monitor. No, you can't actually, because you still get the same performance as a single GPU. And that's the big problem. So unless Nvidia reverses its stance on multi-GPU, 144 hertz or 144 frames per second at 4K is still going to be hard. There will be games that will probably do it. There will be games that absolutely won't do it. If you play CSGO or Overwatch, yeah, you'll probably be able to break 144 frames per second.
Yeah, so if I want to play like Dirt 3 or something, I can probably get really good frame rates.
Yeah, the lower complexity games. I mean, like Ubisoft is notorious for some seriously demanding engines that just don't scale to high frame rates. So I don't think any of the Assassin's Creed games for the last few iterations have come close to 144 frames per second, unless you're like overclocked CPU running lower settings. So
it's good to have something to aspire to, right? Or else there'd be no reason to upgrade and we could all just go home. Actually,
that's the theory.
So we all just stop working. Joe asks, sorry I missed beginning, but any word on expected pricing?
I said $2,000 earlier, Joe. That's my guess. Like, to be clear, this is absolutely a guess based on my knowledge of the industry and history and stuff. Nvidia is not going to tell pricing to anyone, period, at all, until like they announce the pricing. Their partners probably don't have the official word because they don't want it to leak. So anyone talking 2-3 months ago and saying, oh, the price is going to be this. No, they don't know. It's a guess. It's an educated guess, maybe, but and I could be wrong. Like maybe Nvidia will go lower, but let me talk for a bit about Ampere in general. So the A100 has launched. It's a supercomputer part, right? It's in Nvidia's Selene supercomputer, and like it's $200,000 for a DGX A100 system that has 8 of these GPUs. I think that's right. So you subtract, say, $50,000 for all of the extra stuff, and you're left with $150,000 for 8 GPUs or 6 GPUs, whatever it is. Like rough estimate, they're charging $20,000 per A100. and that's for R&D and for supercomputer research and all of these things. They want to get that big bite of the pie. But A100 is also a massive chip. It's 826 millimeters squared or something. It's got 5 stacks of HBM memory. It's a monster, and it's so expensive to manufacture that they really do need to sell it for a lot of money to recoup their costs. They don't need to sell it for $20,000 certainly, but whatever they're selling it for, the market is willing to pay that. The GA102 that we expect the chip inside the RTX 3090 will be called, that's going to be a different chip. It's going to strip out all of your floating point 64 support. It will not have, it might have tensor cores. We don't know if it's going to be the same count as the tensor cores that are in the GA100. Things are going to change. In removing floating point 64 support, they can add in ray tracing support. The ray tracing support is going to be 2nd gen. It will probably be faster. I've seen people saying it's going to be 4 times faster than what's in Turing, but the tensor cores of Ampere are 4 times faster than what's in Turing, but half as many of them. So I think there's some confabulation between those two. We don't really know how fast the ray tracing is going to be. But again, I expect it will be a smaller chip than A100. It will probably be in like the 600 to 700 millimeter square range, conservatively. It could be smaller, it could be bigger, but we don't know. Specs-wise, like A100 has 128 SMs, the streaming multiprocessors that are NVIDIA's jargon for, like if you look at supercomputers, they call an SM a core. It's kind of your functional equivalent to CPU core. It's different, but they count them sort of that same way. So 128 SMs in A100, and 108 of those are enabled. And again, it's a really big chip. Take out some of the extra stuff, they could still do 128 SMs in GA102. Or they could go with like 84 to 90 or something SMs and clock it higher. So either way gets you to the same point. I kind of mentioned earlier 64% memory bandwidth is what Micron's leak revealed. I expect the GPU to have roughly 60% more computational power. So it's like if you have 1,000 cores running at 1 gigahertz or 500 cores running at 2 gigahertz, you get the same computational power roughly. I mean, like there's some trade-offs here and there with clock speed. Sony's PlayStation 5, they mentioned this. They're like, hey, we've got 36 CUs running at 2.1, and Xbox Series X has 52 CUs running at 1.8. But Xbox ends up faster computationally overall. So Nvidia, they can do 84 cores at 2 gigahertz. They can do 118 cores at 1.6 gigahertz or 1.5 gigahertz. The numbers still end up at the same spot, and it will be much faster than the 2080 Ti. So that's kind of where it goes.
So here's a question that Paul can answer. Les asks, what AMD CPU should I use to build a rig to play Cyberpunk 2077?
Raspberry Pi. Sorry, that's... you're muted.
Paul, you're still muted.
Oh, I was sorry. Excuse me. I was saying that's a hard, a hard question to answer if you can't test the game yet. At least not the shipping version. But as with all games, you're not going to necessarily need the fastest CPU on the market to run it. It really just depends on what kind of resolution you're running it at, what kind of a video card you're running it at. It's a really open-ended question.
Well, here's a more specific question about the topic at hand. What kind of CPU will you need to make the most of the RTX 3090?
It's definitely, you're going to start looking at needing a lot more computational horsepower on the CPU side. When we look at graphics benchmarks, with CPUs, even in some of our tests, you see a little delta between the different CPUs, and a lot of that is because you start pushing up closer to the limit of your graphics card, like we test with the 2080 Ti. As you move to these faster graphics cards, I mean, if it's twice as fast, for the graphics cards, then that creates a lot more work for the CPU. You know, a CPU is issuing millions of draw calls. It depends on the type of API you're using, but it's like, you know, DX11 or DX12, you're issuing millions of draw calls per second, you know, to render things on, you know, to tell the GPU to render certain things. And, you know, when you double that and you go to several million per second, and, you know, then you're going to need a faster CPU. Clock speeds will be important.
Yeah,
So
and that
Core i9 for sure,
Of course,
or a Ryzen 9.
yeah, I mean, like if you're buying a $2,000 graphics card, I can't imagine you going, oh, I'm going to make do with a $300 CPU instead of the $500 one, right?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we have said many times that a lot of chips, it's very much GPU bound, right? So maybe you need that extra.
It depends on the game, but you know, there's going to be a lot less GPU bound that's meaningful when you have a card that's significantly faster than anything out there today. Right?
Yeah, and like Paul, I've done CPU testing in the past. For those of you who don't know, I used to be on PC Gamer. I shifted over to Tom's Hardware, same company. A lot of the CPU testing is done at 1080p, just to try and move the bottleneck to the CPU, right? And I just did an article a couple weeks ago that was the 9900K versus the 3900X, and I tested multiple GPUs at 1080p, 1440p, and 4K, and naturally the gap between the CPUs narrows quite a bit as you go to 4K. Double your graphics card power though, and suddenly the 1080p results start looking like the new 1440p looks like 1080p, your 1080p looks like 720p, and your 4K starts looking like your 1440p. So if the graphics card gets 50-70% faster, you're going to need more CPU to take full advantage of that. Which, I mean, like right now, a 3900X, when I tested it, there were plenty of games where with a 2080 Super, a 9900K beat the 3900X with a 2080 Ti at 1080p, I should clarify. So we're shifting back to, you got to have the faster CPU. So Zen 3, I mean, if you're willing to buy, again, an extremely expensive graphics card, there's no doubt about that. Even if it's only $1,000, that's still a ton of money for most gamers. So I think Zen 3 it's totally reasonable to expect, hey, if you had $1,000 to burn on your graphics card, you ought to be considering upgrading to the latest and greatest CPU once it arrives.
Yeah, fair enough. And probably you don't want to use a mechanical hard drive.
Yeah, I'm done with anything less than a 1 terabyte SSD. I mean, you can get them for $100, and I'm done with hard drives. Can't do it.
Yeah. The principle of a hard drive bothers me at this point. So,
discs.
Sergeant Lee has asked a few times about the cost in pounds sterling, and my guess is that it would cost the same in pounds sterling as it costs in dollars. I really don't know why that is, and if someone else can explain it to me, I'd love to hear. But it seems like Europeans and the British get kind of gypped on a lot of these prices because they get the same price in euros and dollars euros and pounds that we get in dollars, even though their currency is worth more. I'm really not sure why that is. Like, if you
their taxes are pretty high. Like Great Britain has like a 20-25% value added tax, I think. So that adds to it. You have to ship it over there. It's basically, that's what they've decided to do. So actually your euro price is usually 5 to 10% higher than the dollar price. So if we say $1,000 US, then it's probably going to be 1,100 euros. It might be 950 pounds.
Right. So unfortunately, you don't come out like it would an exchange rate, because $2,000 is 1,500 pounds. Although Sergeant Lee says that they will buy it if it costs up to 2,000 pounds, which means next time I go to the UK, I want Sergeant Lee to pay for my dinner, because obviously they've got some money, which is good. So someone else asks. Someone else says, resolution is not that important if NVIDIA implements DLSS widely or uses CRT monitors.
I like that last bit.
Say about
CRT monitors. I don't remember the last time I saw anyone seriously using a CRT. I mean, it's been 15 to 20 years since I made this switch. I can't remember. I jumped from a 21-inch CRT to a 24-inch Dell monitor in, I think, 2003 or 2004. And I missed the slightly higher refresh rate, but everything else about the LCD, I was like, no, this is a win. But the DLSS thing, it's true. Like, so combined DLSS, deep learning super sampling, it's NVIDIA's AI-powered image enhancement and upscaling algorithm. And effectively right now, DLSS 2.0, if you run at 4K and you use the performance setting of DLSS 2, you will upscale from 1080p to 4K, which means 1/4 the pixels rendered, and then you use machine intelligence to upscale the result, and it looks pretty good. And part of that is because temporal anti-aliasing kind of looks crappy. It's really blurry. And so it's like, well, hey, if we get rid of TAA and use more computational resources, we can actually anti-alias and make the end result look comparable or even better than temporal AA. And that's fine. So, 1080p plus DLSS 2.0 ends up performing usually, so that means rendering at 4K, and it usually ends up performing kind of similar to the 1440p results, which, as I noted earlier, like the new 1440p is going to perform like the current 1080p. So, that means you're going to have more of a CPU bottleneck, and potentially you're going to hit higher than 100 frames per second, which would be good. So you can actually make use of your 144 hertz monitors. I mean, honestly, you want G-Sync or FreeSync these days if you're running at more than 60 hertz, because almost no games maintain a steady 144 frames per second, but they'll do the 110 to 130 range pretty decently.
Do you think it will run Call of Duty Modern Warfare at 4K 144 FPS?
At lower settings. That's the short answer, right? Like if you're going 4K maxed out settings, no. I did some testing. I'd need to actually pull it up, but I'm pretty sure the 2080 Ti was just breaking 60 frames per second, maybe 70 frames per second at 4K Ultra. So, even if it's twice as fast, that's still only 120 frames per second.
That still sounds pretty good to me, but
it's better, right? That's why I say G-Sync and FreeSync are your friends here, because you can get the dynamic refresh rates tied to your frame rate.
I guess we got to leave something for the 4090 to aspire to.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we just stop. So I guess there has to be a limit, right? So if we want to get to 144 hertz 4K Ultra in game, maybe that'll be whatever comes after Ampere. I don't know if we even have a code name for that, but
I don't think we know after Ampere yet. It's probably going to be some scientists. We've had Turing and Ampere. I'm trying to think if I saw something recently, but it's not coming to mind. Chino, I love your quote there. The more you buy, the more you save. I cringed every time Jensen said that during these briefings on the A100, but it's a big business talk, I guess.
That sounds like something you'd say at the dollar store. The more you buy, the more you save.
That's Jensen's tagline for sure.
So we have time for one more question, and I think this is a good one from Sergeant Lee again. Is there going to be a Titan, or is RTX 3090 going to be the top card?
What do you think, Paul? Oh, I'm passing.
I don't know. I don't think there'll be a need for a Titan, but I say that now. And, I think that some of that would probably depend upon, what Big Navi looks like. NVIDIA, of course, is going to respond to competitive pressure. They want to have that Halo spot that's the fastest video card in the world. Is more about branding and the strength of the brand than anything. They always say they sell 1% of those Halo cards, or it's like 1% of their sales or something less. But the value of being able to say that they're the fastest video card series on the planet. That's immeasurable. And so I think personally, I think that would just depend on what AMD has out there.
I think that's like there's that, and there's also so your current Titan RTX is it's 24 gigabytes of GDDR6, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's $2,500 card. You can easily double the memory on the 3090. So instead of using 8 gigabit GDDR6X, Micron even said they'll have 16 gigabit modules. So that gives you your 24 gigabyte option. But I like Paul, I think it will depend on what AMD does with Big Navi. If it's really good, Nvidia still has the A100 with HBM2 memory. They could try and consumerize that and charge $3,000.
Yeah, prices go up even more.
Yeah.
But
I mean, the Titan V was basically that, and Nvidia says, "Oh, it's not a gaming card and stuff." But some gamers bought the Titan V just because they could, I guess.
It's all about bragging. It's all about the power of that brand. Those Halo cards, they really, I hate to say they're insignificant, but I've read somewhere that it's like 0.5% of sales or something like that. It's a ridiculously small number.
Anyway, no time soon. I think it's fair to say it won't be next month.
It will be in November. They'll announce it.
Yeah, I mean, I would guess they would save something like that for next year. Probably not even the beginning of the year. Probably, maybe that would be in next year's refresh. I don't know what you guys think, but probably.
So the time that AMD announces their card, announce it at the same time and just drown them out.
1 week before AMD. That's the Nvidia model. Like seriously, they do that so often where it's like the Navi 10 launched last year. Oh, guess what? RTX Super came out 2 days before it. So like someone's planning that right now.
Yeah, quite possibly. Well, I want to thank first and foremost our audience for asking such awesome questions, and I want to let everyone know that we normally have the Tom's Hardware Show on Thursdays at 3 p.m. Eastern, and we also have another show, the Piecast about Raspberry Pi, on Tuesdays at 2:30 p.m. Eastern, and you can find both of those on our YouTube channel or on our Facebook. And and of course, we would love it if you would subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the like button so we could so you could more easily find out about our stuff. Anyhow, thanks to Jarred, thanks to Paul, and we'll see you soon.
Take care.